All right, so this is continuing where we should have left off on Wednesday, but for now, let's talk about these theoretical issues. And know that these are some controversial type debates that's going on in psychology when we're speaking about stages or continuity. Sorry for that pause. But what I was saying is a second key debate concern would be whether development occurs in discrete qualitative type ways or stages than from continuous quantitative gradual type of shifts. Stage theorists, they believe that development occurs at different rates and it alternates between periods of little change and periods of abrupt. Is it rapid change? Well, as we go on in the chapter, we'll be talking more about the stages of physical development as well as Piaget's theories of cognitive development. But know this, continuity theorists, on the other hand, will maintain that development is continuous and that with new abilities, new skills, and knowledge, it's gradually added as a relatively uniform pace. So, adult thinking and intelligence will differ quantitatively than from a child's. Now, have you generally maintained your personal characteristics from the time you was an infant to now? Which adulthood, remember, we consider that to be stability. Or do your current personality bear little resemblance to the personality you displayed during infancy? And infancy is going to represent change. Okay? Psychologists who emphasize stability in development, they kind of hold that measurements of personality is taken during childhood are really important predictors of how you're going to be as an adult. And of course, psychologists, we've also been able to emphasize these changes to a certain degree. So now, which of the positions would you think is most correct? Most psychologists, they don't take the hard line to either way because you can see some adages on both sides of it. Instead, we kind of are interactionist type perspectives or a biopsychosocial model. So, in the example, the nature versus nurture debate. Again, psychologists, they kind of agree that the development would emerge from unique genetic predispositions as well as experiences from the environment. So, when we're looking at research approaches within developmental psychology, we're looking at how the study changes that happens throughout the entire human lifespan. That being developmental psychologists, they kind of need to add two specific techniques. The first one would be cross-sectional design, and then the second one is going to be longitudinal. Now, the cross-sectional design, this examines individuals from various ages, that being that so we might look at those at 20, those at 40, those at 60, or those at 80. And then there's going to be at one point in time, it gives information about age difference. Now, with a longitudinal design, this is going to follow more of a single individual or a group of same age individuals over an extended period of time. Now, what that does is help gives us information about ages as it shows the change. Now, take a moment and compare these methods. Why do you think these research methods show different results? Pause and think about it. All right, I'll give you the answer. Cross-sectional studies, they sometimes are going to confuse genuine age differences, which with cohort effects. And cohort effects are those differences that result from specific histories of an age group study. And this can be shown within this figure that you see on the slide. So, like when we're talking about the 81-year-olds, they were measured by cross-sectional design. It showed dramatically lowered scores than 25-year-olds. But is that kind of due to aging, or is there a possibility to more broad environmental differences, such as a less formal education, or did poor nutrition play a part? Because the different age groups, which we call cohorts, grew up in different historical periods, these results they might not apply to people growing up in other times. So with cross-sectional designs, the age effects or cohort effects, they sometimes hopelessly is going to get tangled up in it. So why do the two methods show such different results? Researchers suggest that these different results, they're reflected from a central problem with cross-sectional studies. And these studies, they're going to often confuse genuine age differences with cohort effects. And those differences that result from specific histories of the age groups is what they'll be studying. So when we're looking at this slide, we can see that the 81-year-olds measured dramatically lower scores than the 25-year-olds. But again, what does that do? Will we be looking at the broad environmental differences or nutrition or education? Because those age groups and cohorts are going to be different historical points, we can't rely 100% on the results to apply at people during different times. Now, here's just a slide giving quick again advantages and disadvantages to cross-sectional type of research compared to longitudinal type of research. We have with cross-sectional, the advantages is it's going to give us information at different age ranges. It's a quick type of study, less expensive. As I was saying, it's quick and less expensive. You typically have larger samples or groups that you can take from. Disadvantages, again, is going to be about the cohort effects where it's kind of hard to be able to separate. Um, Generalizing is more restricted. These type of behaviors and mental processes, you can only look at one point at a time. In terms of the longitudinal type of studies, the advantages are information shows about the ages as to change, how a person changes throughout those different ages. There's more confidence within the results, as well as more in-depth information about each participant, not just the group, but those who are participating in the group. Now, disadvantage costs a whole lot more money because of the time periods we're using. Again, there's a restricted generalizability, and you got to worry about dropouts because some people will, and again, because they're volunteering, we can't force them to stay in it. All right, so let's start looking at the prenatal physical development. Conception, we had this fun on Monday, but conception, that's when the ovum is going to unite with the sperm cell and it creates what we call a zygote, and that new cell is going to be created through the union of the ovum and the sperm. So now, after the discharge from either the left or the right ovary, ovum is going to travel through the opening of the fallopian tube. Fertilization will then occur. So it's going to normally take place within the first third of the fallopian tubes. And that fertilized ovum, now a zygote, will reach the uterus. It's going to be implanting itself on the wall of the uterus and start to grow tendril-like structures that will intertwine with the rich supply of blood vessels located there. So after implementation, the organism will then be considered an embryo. So when we're talking about prenatal growth as well as growth during the first few years after birth, it's considered to be proximal distal, and that's meaning near to far. So with the innermost parts of the body developing before the outermost parts of the body being developed. So a fetus, which again, it's considered a fetus around the 8th week after conception. The arms are going to develop before its hands and fingers. Development will also be preceded with cephalocaudally, and that's basically the head to the tail. So a fetus head is going to be extremely larger compared to the lower part of the body. All right. So now looking at major hazards during the prenatal stages. Despite warnings, some women are going to still drink alcohol while they're pregnant. And in each year, thousands of babies are going to be born with brain damage. So what I want you to take a look at is some of the factors, environmental conditions that actually can endanger a child during the prenatal process, during the pregnancy. One thing we have to worry about and consider is malnutrition, and that's looking at the low birth weight, uh, problems with malformations occurring. The brain is not going to be as developed, as well as uh, the fetus will be more susceptible to diseases, exposure to stress, and we went over stress. Y'all know the confines with that. But in terms of a pregnant woman who's stressed, what might happen? Child might be born with low birth weight, might demonstrate hyperactivity or irritability, um, as well as having problems with eating. When we go to the, medically, if we have any type of x-rays, you ever notice they all be wearing these special jackets and they just say, okay, clear? Well, that's because if the exposure to x-rays actually over periods of time for an adult can be detrimental. So imagine a pregnant woman having x-rays done. What can happen? Malformations can occur, or even cancer can happen. Of course, we've spoken in the past about both illegal and legal drugs, but understand how it might affect a fetus and a baby once born. There might be shortness of bone growth, hearing loss, low birth weight. They might have fetal alcohol syndrome. They have to have issues from the alcohol as well as nicotine, intellectual disability. They might have attention deficits, or they might even die. Also know that there are different diseases that can impact and affect the fetus as they're growing if the mother contracts it while pregnant. That being German measles or rubella, herpes, HIV/AIDS, as well as toxoplasmosis. These can lead to blindness, deafness, intellectual disability, heart as well as other malformations, brain infections, spontaneous abortions, premature birth, as well as low birth weight, and it can also include death. Just make sure you remember what teratogens means. Teratogen is anything like when we're talking about alcohol or nicotine or any type of environmental factors or agents that actually can cross the placenta and that can bring damage during prenatal development. And again, know what fetal alcohol syndrome is. This is a combination of birth defects from maternal alcohol abuse. But do understand that damage can actually occur based upon one drink from the mother. All right. So you remember when we was working in chapter 2 that we talked about how the human brain is divided into three major sections, that being the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Y'all remember that? All right. Well, I want you to note how at 3 weeks after conception, there's three brain sections that are one long neural tube, pretty much, which later will become the brain and the spinal cord. So as infants, they start to learn and they develop the synaptic connections that's between active neurons. They start to get stronger. The dendrite connections are going to become more elaborate. Synaptic pruning, and synaptic pruning, I'm meaning the reduction of any kind of unused synapses. They're going to just kind of wane off. It kind of helps to support the process. Myelination, y'all remember myelination. Remember, it's the accumulation of fatty tissue that's coating the axons of the nerve cells, which helps to continue until early adulthood. Remember, it also helps with transporting that information on neural impulses or the action potentials. It's going to help speed it up. Okay? So there are some dramatic changes that's going to happen with the brain, as well as our body proportion the more we grow older. And so at birth, remember your head, it was kind of 1/4 your total body size. We're born with really large heads. Whereas in adulthood, your head then becomes 1/8 the body size. So continuing on talking about early childhood physical development compared to the hidden internal changes in brain development, the orderly emergence of active movement skills, known more as motor development, is easily observed as well as measured. The newborn's first motor abilities are going to be limited to reflexes or involuntary responses to stimulation. So, for example, when we're talking about a rooting reflex, this occurs when something touches the baby's cheek. Okay, the infant will automatically turn its head. It's going to open its mouth and then it's going to root to that nipple. When we're talking about other simple reflexes, the infant will soon begin to show voluntary control over movement of various body parts. So a helpless newborn who cannot even lift his or her head will transform into an active toddler capable of crawling, walking, as well as climbing. Keep in mind, though, that the motor development is largely due to natural maturation, but it can also be affected by environmental influences such as the disease as well as neglect. So at birth, a newborn, they're actually able to smell odors as well as distinguish between salty, sweet, and bitter tastes. Breastfed newborns will start to be able to recognize and show preference for the odor of the or and the taste of their mother's milk over the mother. They just wanting to have that milk. Additionally, though, the newborn's sense of touch and pain is going to be highly developed, and we've been able to have this demonstrated through reactions to the heel pricking for blood tests, as well as when male children are circumcised. So the newborn sense of vision, it starts off low. Okay, at birth, infants estimated to have a vision between 2200 to 2600. So imagine what the infant's visual is like. The level of detail you see at 200 to 200 feet to 600 feet compared to 20/20 vision. But the good news is every day it gets a little stronger. So within the first few months, vision is going to quickly improve. And usually by 6 months, visual acuity will reach at least 2100, and then near adulthood, by 2 years, it'll be that 20/20. Okay, so one of the most interesting findings when we're talking about infant sensory and perceptual research kind of concerns hearing. Not only can a newborn hear quite well at birth, but also during the last few months of the womb, the fetus actually is able to hear sounds outside the mother's body. So it raises that possibility about fetal learning, as well as some, who've been able to advocate special stimulation for a fetus as a way of increasing its intelligence, creativity, as well as general alertness and innovations. Studies on these possible fetal learnings, though, have found that the newborn will easily recognize their mother's voice over a stranger's. They've also been able to show a preference for children's stories, like the cat in the hat or the king and the mice and the cheese, those stories. But when they're read to them while they were still in the room, it's been something to demonstrate that they recall it once they've been born. On the other hand, though, there are some experts that have cautioned that too much of the wrong kind of stimulation before birth actually is stressful for both mother and child. And so they suggest that you do it in increments and not overdo it. All right. So actually, we're stopping at slide 21. I'm going to stop here, and we will pick up again on this next week.